Hello and welcome to People of Interest. This is a show that is based on the stories from people like you and me. I am your host, Miguel Guanipa, and today I have a very special guest for my show. He is a father, a husband, an entrepreneur, and a World War II veteran. His name is Edmund Tonry.
That's
Mr.
correct.
Tonry, thank you very much for joining me on the show.
Okay.
So I wanted to invite you over because you said, how old are you again, you said?
I'm 93.
93. So if you're 93, you probably have a few stories to tell.
I guess we do.
Okay. So first thing first is you picked a picture that you brought for us. Uh, that's the background right now. Could you
Yes.
describe what that is for us?
That is the flag of the Army of Japan,
Mm-hmm.
and that was the one that they would go into battle with.
Okay. It has a
Yes.
few writings on it.
Yes. And the writings on the thing was wishing the individual good luck uh, from their families.
Hmm. So how did you come into possession of that flag?
Well, it was like most of the souvenirs. I will explain that to you later.
Oh, okay. Okay, what would you like to talk about right now then?
Well, I would like to talk about my family.
Let's do that
Okay.
then.
Okay. My father's family.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, my grandfather came from Ireland, and he came in about the 1860, and he settled in Brooklyn.
Mm.
And he was coming from Ireland with a family, and the first wife he had, she died in childbirth,
Hmm.
and she had a second wife, and she died in childbirth,
Mm.
and then he married the housekeeper. So he was married 3 times,
Hmm.
and he had 8 children. They that was a Tonry family.
Were they all from his last wife, all the children, or?
No, the children. My father came from the second wife.
Oh, okay.
Okay,
All right.
and then uh, the third one didn't have any children. She was the housekeeper that he married
Mm-hmm.
that took care of the children and the house. You know,
Okay.
when he spoke English, which was an advantage for an immigrant because he came from Ireland, which was an English-speaking country.
Mm.
He worked as a bartender in the South Brooklyn section of New York.
Now we're talking about your father now.
No,
Or your
grandfather.
Your grandfather. Okay, go ahead.
So my grandfather, by working there, he met a lot of politicians from New York,
Mm-hmm.
and by meeting them and being friends with them, they offered him an opportunity to work for the city. That's how it was sort of done at that time. Everybody had to know somebody,
Mm-hmm.
and he became a commissioner in New York, and it was a very good paying job, and he was able to buy a house in the Bay Ridge section of Brooklyn. It was called the Brownstone House. It was a 3-story house, and they had bedrooms on the third floor, and they had the parlor on the second floor, and then they had a basement, which was a kitchen, a dining room, and a sitting room.
How much was that house? Do you remember, or did he tell you?
No, I have no idea what the
Two hundred
price
dollars
was.
or something.
Huh?
$200 or something. Back then, they
No,
probably.
I would say it was in the
the
thousand
thousand.
probably, but not very much.
Yeah.
And they were brought up. The children, these 8 children, were brought up in the Bay Ridge section of Brooklyn.
Mm-hmm.
They all went to school there, and they all went to the 8th grade. At that time, most people only went to the 8th grade, and then they had to go out and work when they were 14 years of age.
Mm.
Doesn't sound right now because the law doesn't allow that, but
Mm-hmm.
at that time there was no restriction for it, and that's how people lived. They didn't think that the next phase would be important to them.
Mm.
So they only went to the 8th grade. High school was not available to them anymore. So that was the way the family developed. My father went into the war in 1919, and he went to France and Germany, and the war only lasted 1 year, so he was only in the army for the 1 year. And when he came out, he got a job on Wall Street. And Wall Street was booming at that time, and he was doing very well at Wall Street. And then he met my mother. Okay, now my mother's family came from Buffalo, New York, and a small town outside of Buffalo was called Dunkirk. Her father was of German descent. Her mother was of French descent. The combination we had now, French and German, and then Irish, that's the way we ended up. Then when they got married, my mother had her first child, and the first child was born, and her mother got sick up in Buffalo, and she had to go up and nurse her. She finally died. I think it was of cancer. And then she went back to Brooklyn, where the family was, and when she got back there, at 18 months, the baby died of pleurisy.
What is pleurisy?
It was a big disease at that time that was many people had pleurisy and died of it at that time. It was like an epidemic. And,
How old was the baby when it died?
18 months.
18 months. Oh my goodness.
And then my sister was born, and then I was born, and there was the two of us. And then let's say Wall Street caved in, and now it was a depression, no work, no jobs, and my father had to apply to the WPA, which was a Roosevelt program that they put in at that time. He was able to work 3 days a week, $48 a month. And he lived in the center of Brooklyn, which was a little bit higher priced area than they could possibly afford on that small salary. So they decided to move to Coney Island. Coney Island was a summer community, and during the off season there was very inexpensive rentals down there, and so the family moved down to Coney Island. And for my first 12 years, I spent at Coney Island, and I went to the schools in Coney Island. My sister also went to schools in Coney Island, and also my brother, Donald, was born in Coney Island, and he was 10 years younger than us. Our 12 years we spent on the beach every summer, unsupervised by our families. It was our playground. We were on the beach swimming, and in the morning sometime we would go out fishing, and it was just a very nice place for children to grow up. When we went to the schools, we went to the grammar schools, and then we went to the junior high schools. My sister was always ahead of us because she was oldest, and she was the first one to graduate, and she went to Lincoln High School. And when I graduated, I went to Machine and Metal Trades High School, and that was in 96th Street in New York. That was quite a ride from Coney Island to go all the way to 96th Street in New York. It was only a nickel ride. That's all it cost at that time.
This is past the 8th grade, though, right?
Yeah. So My father, who we had lived in a house with cold, what's called cold water flats, no heat and stuff. And you had to provide your own heat. We had a little oil stove and a little stove in the kitchen and stuff like that. And after a period of time, the landlord that had that house also had other property. He had summer property and another apartment house, and he offered my father free rent if he was going to be the custodian of the properties for him. And we moved to a steam-heated house where on the third floor and overlooking the ocean. Today, you'd probably pay $1 million for that view.
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
Yeah, and well, we were able to stay there up until the time that the war started. When the war started, since my father was doing the electrical work in all the schools in New York, he went from school to school and updated their electrical systems, the bell systems, and he finally ended up at LaGuardia Airport. He worked at LaGuardia Airport for about 2 years, and then he was offered, when the war started, at the Brooklyn Navy Yard. He was able to have a good job at the Brooklyn Navy Yard. So we moved out of Coney Island and moved closer to the Brooklyn Navy Yard, which was in central Brooklyn. And we were still able to finish our schooling with a nickel ride by subway. And we were able to enjoy the Prospect Park area. It was very high-priced community, not where we were living, but in the area was considered very nice. So we were very pleased with the area, and there was no problem people there or any of this type. And when we finally, my sister was the first one. When she graduated, she got a job working for a law office, and she worked at that. And when the war came out, she decided she wanted to go into the Marines, and this was the first of the women to go into the Marines. She went to Fordham University for her training because the women Marines did not have a place to be trained. So they trained them in the college, and then they were transferred to the Pentagon building down in Washington. And when I was going to school, I had to finish my high school. When I was going to graduate from school, half the class was gone. At that time, the war was on, and everybody just joined different services, the Army, the Navy, the Marines, and so on. And I joined the Marines at that time. But I was not called. I was an August birthday, so I graduated on the right time. And but there was only half the class there at the time of graduation, because they were all in the service at that point, the older ones. And when we got all finished with our Marine Corps situation, we went down to Paris Island, and we were trained at Paris Island, and then we were trained at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, and then we had to go out to San Diego, and we went out to San Diego on a train, and we had to sleep on a non-sleeper. They only had straw seats at that time in there, and there was no bedding or anything else, so we had to sleep on the floor, on a seat if you could squeeze into one, and it was a very interesting trip. But it was very interesting because I have never been any place in my life.
How long was that ride?
it was probably about 10 days.
Oh.
It was very slow. It was a southern railroad. It went through Texas, and Texas, you never get through Texas. It goes day after day. Where are we? Texas. Where are we? Texas. And finally you get to New Mexico and beautiful country out there.
So would the train stop on occasion to get some food or
Oh,
something?
no, they stopped with that too much.
Yeah.
every stop they stopped.
Yeah.
And then at night they would stop, and everything was making noise on the platform and wake you up. And then they had the steam engines and the making noise, ooh, ooh, and that was very, very annoying. But we finally got to Camp Pendleton, and we had final training in the hills of Camp Pendleton, which was near San Diego. And then we were put on a ship, and we went. We were going to Hawaii. We were called the Replacement Division for the 5th Marine Division. The 5th Marine Division and the 2nd Marine Division was on Iwo Jima fighting. And ours was a replacement division for the 5th Marine Division. We got on the boat, and the boat was on the dock, tied up, and then we sat out on the edge of the boat and watched the land. And the boat went up, the boat went down, the boat went up, the boat went down. And then we were...
Is that the tide or something?
Huh?
What
No,
was
it was just the waves, you know.
Oh, okay.
Up, and we were tied up on the dock.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
And then it was time for the boat to leave. And so they said, okay, it's time to eat. So they give us a tray, and we get on the line for getting our food. And I got it on there, but I left the tray there and went
the
back
boat?
to the rail.
Oh, okay.
I
Because the
wa-
boat was okay.
I couldn't tell you how badly
Oh.
I was in the sack for a week.
Wow.
I couldn't move. I got so sick, and I couldn't eat. I couldn't do anything. But when we got to Hawaii, everything sort of stopped. And when you got back on land, it was a godsend, and we started feeling better. We stayed on the Oahu Island for about a week to 10 days. That's where Pearl Harbor is. Then they sent us over to the big island. It was the Hawaiian island, and they called it Camp Terra. And the Tarawa was named after one of the battles that they had in the Pacific, and that was the camp, and it was on the top of the mountain where the volcanoes were on Hawaii. And there's smoke coming out of those things all the time. And that's where we did our training. And we trained there for maybe 6 months or so. And we were training for the invasion of Japan at that time. And when we got on our boats to go to the staging area, which was Saipan and Tinian, those were small islands that we had taken over from the Japanese. And when we were going, it took us 2 months to get there. If you went straight, it would have probably taken you 5 or 6 days. But since the war was on, and the Japanese had to be confused, as well as we were avoiding the submarines, so we were going back and forth over the Pacific, and not in any one straight line. And so it took us quite a long time before we got to Saipan. And when we got there, there was 1,000 ships, 1,000 ships at least, outside of Saipan, anchored out there. And we were there for a couple of days, and all of a sudden everybody left. They dropped the Nagasaki second bomb.
Oh.
And when they dropped the second bomb, we were on our way. for the invasion of Japan. And we landed in the harbor of Sasebo, and in landing in the Sasebo harbor, there was no resistance at all from the Japanese. The Japanese government said, "Stop, put your weapons away," and they did, and they were very obedient people. When we got to the Sasebo harbor, the first thing we had to do was unload our ships as they were coming in. So everybody just got onto these ships, and we had to get all of the inventory off of the ships for supplying the food and more guns and other stuff for the troops as they were going. So our group was stationed right there at Sasebo Harbor. And then we were finished with the unloading of the ships. Then they said we have to disarm the area. And these were tunnels into the, like a train tunnel, right into the side of the hills. And there was maybe 6 or 7 of them that we had to take all the ammunition out of there and put it on barges and take it out to sea and drop it. We had
Drop it in the water?
yes. Today it would be illegal.
Oh.
But at that time, everything was disarmed, period.
So there's probably weapons down there still, right?
Yeah. Oh, it's underwater. They had, some of them might explode someday. I don't know. But there were all bombs and all kinds of stuff for all kind of weapons. And we had an engine that they had there that went into the tunnel with a flat bottom trailer behind it or train behind it. And we would load them up, and then they would take them out to where the barge was, out near the edge of the water. And the Japanese were hired by us to take it off there and put them on the barge, because it was very dangerous work. If they dropped those things, we didn't know what it was, So we worked at that until all the ammunition was out of the tunnels, and then they assigned us to 8 men per truck, and then we had to disarm the population. And we got into the car, and then we went to this town, and we got all their weapons, and we had a warehouse, and the stuff would be then trucked to the warehouse. That was the souvenirs you have on the desk here.
Oh, okay.
These were some of the things that...
These?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, so these 3 rifles, right? These are like
yes.
Japanese, right?
They're all Japanese. Some are long rifles, and
Looks
some
like a sniper. Is this a sniper rifle?
Yeah, it's the sniper's rifle.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I see these are weapons that were confiscated then?
Those would be carried. That's pistols, yes.
Okay, here's an interesting one. That was confiscated too.
Well, those are just their samurai
Swords.
swords, yes.
Samurai swords.
Yeah, samurai. Yeah, that's right.
That's pretty cool. Oh, and these too.
Yes.
So you went into town.
And we
And just-
and all of these weapons were put into warehouses.
Mm-hmm.
And in the warehouses, they were guarded. We had to guard the warehouses, but well as that. We didn't ourselves. It was other people that were responsible for guarding the warehouse. We were responsible for picking the stuff up from town to town and village to village. And there was 2 Marine divisions there. There was the 5th Marines and the 2nd Marine Division. So we had saturated the island with 50,000
So the
Marines.
people were the people passive. They gave you the weapons that
very
didn't
passive,
give you
and they gave them up, and they gave everything up. They were if they give every knife, and they weren't allowed to keep anything, and they turned them all in.
Oh.
The warehouses were loaded with this stuff, and then we finally got to a point where we were wasting our time. Our last trip was to Fukuoka, was an airport there, and we were supposed to disarm the airport. When we got to the airport, there was only one plane out there. It was made of tissue paper there. It was terrible, and
Yeah.
there was nothing there for us to disarm. And we stayed there for about a week, and then they sent us to a city called Kumamoto. And in Kumamoto, there was a Japanese barracks that they took over, and they had maybe 6 or 7 of these barracks there, the 2-story barracks, and then we had a place to go every day and a place to sleep, and everything was more normal. We had a place to you can buy your beer and stay, and there was no you can go into the town, and it was very, very comfortable. And these buildings were all made of wood. And one night we hear the word fire, and fire, okay, and the place is burning up. And so everybody jumps up out of their cots, and what do you do first? The first thing you do, you don't know. Some fellows took their rifles and threw them out the window.
Yeah.
Some people took their mattresses and threw it out the window. Some people threw their clothes out the window.
Yeah, it's a big fire.
And oh yes, the place burned down right down to the. Down. These things went up like matches. You know,
Wow.
it was all wood. There was a bamboo pole outside the window, which was our one that we could slide down from the 2nd floor, and that was the only thing. Otherwise, you get hurt
Wow.
jumping out a window 2 stories up. And there was no one that was hurt that I know of, but they then put us into one room that they had left because this place burned down completely, and every cot in that room was touching one another.
Yeah.
But so if you ever sat in a room when every cot touches one another, and someone had to go to the bathroom, they stepped on you going over it. It was a terrible situation.
Sardines.
I'm glad that wasn't for long. They were finally able to get us on more barracks and put another place to go. And the same thing happened the second time. And I had accumulated my souvenirs in. I had put them in the ceiling of the building.
You got another fire?
That had the fire.
Another fire.
Yeah,
Again.
I had 2 fires
Wow.
and the barracks and stuff, and it was all our own fault. We had these oil burners things that they had going on at night.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't have heat, so in the hallway they had these oil burners, and they just leaked or something, and they just spread out, and anyway.
So you have some souvenirs.
Lost the souvenirs
Yeah.
completely. And then I was transferred to the quartermaster department, and the quartermaster department had in charge of the souvenirs. So, we went in and had our pick.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had
You
sent.
replaced the ones that you lost.
I replaced everyone, but I had my pick where I could get a good variety of all of them, and then put them in a crate, and then we send them home for nothing, because when you were overseas, you didn't pay for any
What are some of the
postage.
souvenirs that you
Huh?
get? Do you remember some of the souvenirs that you get?
Well, right there.
Some of these
They're
things?
all there.
The
They're-
swords?
Huh?
These are souvenirs?
Yes, they're all souvenirs. They're all.
Oh.
They were all.
Okay, so this is the pick. This is the
Yeah,
ones that you picked.
I had them in my attic
Oh.
at home
I don't know
for.
if you want to show those.
Yeah.
If those you don't have those anymore, right?
Huh?
You don't have those anymore.
There's no more. No,
Okay.
I had sold them all.
Oh, okay.
I took them to Brimfield where the flea market out there.
Oh, all right. That's
Yeah.
good.
And they were very anxious to get them. And that was the story of that part. Now we get back to the story of my daughter. My daughter, she went to the local schools, and that was, her name is Mary Ann, and she was in the drum corps. We had a drum corps here, and right in this area right here, and she was the color guard captain of the drum corps, and my son Michael was a bugler in the drum corps. Paul was not in the drum corps. He was kind of sick of the drum corps.
Oh.
He was the younger one. And Marianne went on to school, and she graduated from the local high school, and then she went to Framingham State College. When she decided to go to Framingham, she decided to take what they call the CLEP test. A CLEP test means you can take a test of all the subjects they want to give you in the first year. And any of these subjects that you would be able to pass, you wouldn't have to take. So she CLEP'd a year off of her college. She went to got her college degree in 3 instead of 4 years.
They don't have that anymore, though, right? You can't do that.
I don't know. Some schools offer it, but
She's pretty smart.
Framingham, she was smart. So she got out of school and graduated, and she tried to get a job because she specialized in psychology, and it was her choice, not mine. And so she tried for jobs in schools and other stuff. She was either overqualified or underqualified for the jobs, so she wasn't getting anywhere. So she decided to take a job because she wanted to buy clothes and other stuff. And so she took a job at Mass Electric, and it was envelopes coming in. They had to open the envelopes. You put it on the machine, it cuts it off on the end, so the envelope is open. So after about 2 weeks, they allowed her to take it out of the envelope. She was getting a promotion.
You gotta get trained.
Yeah. After the 2 weeks, and she did this for a while. I can't tell you how long it took, but on the bulletin board, they had what they call job postings. So they had a job posting on there, technical writer that they're looking for, and that the job was they had to post it. So she applied for the technical writing job, and she got the job. And so she was now in Mass Electric writing technical stuff. Every item that the men had, and if it was new, it had to be a booklet sent out to them, and they had to know exactly how to handle it. But it was in a different language. It had to be a very simple language, and you can't go on and on and on. You do this, do this, you do this, you do this. It
Instructions.
Yeah. And it was had to be very clear. It can't be wish-washy.
Yeah.
So she worked at that job, and she got a promotion, and she went to another department, and she went to another department, and she became in charge of the computer systems at Mass Electric. And then she was in charge of there's a plant in Brooklyn, plant in New York State, in England. So every 6 weeks she had to fly over to England because that was her department over there, and they had to keep things coordinated with the company here in Framingham here. So she did well in there, and she worked there for 30 years, and then when her salary got so high, they decided that it would be nice if she take her 30 years and go home and retire. So she did that, and she was very happy with it, and she had a beautiful 401k with that company, and that was nice. So she went, and she now lives at Wallem Lake in a beautiful house, and we have a house at Wallem Lake too, across the street from her. But ours is a small house, and hers is a big house. And
What about your older children?
I will get to them.
Oh, okay. They may feel left out if you talk so much about one of them.
I'm going the oldest one first.
Oh, all right, okay.
And was the oldest, and she did very well.
Okay, That sounds good. Sounds like
And she's now working very hard. She works 20 hours a week at the Unibank.
Yeah?
Yes,
What's her name?
Mary Ann
Mary Ann
Duval.
Duval. Okay.
And she works Tuesday and Thursday a full day, and Wednesday a half a day. That's her 20 hours. That's all she wants to put in, and she does very well. And she is the king of the family. She anything you want done, she's got it already done. She's very efficient,
Very efficient.
too efficient maybe for us, and we call her sort of the boss.
She's the boss.
Oh yeah.
What is the other one? Usually the older ones are.
Yeah.
At the
Well,
new
now we'll take Michael. Michael followed Mary Ann in school because he was younger, and he went to the same school system as he did. And Michael went to UMass University, and he went through there, and he had 2 knee operations, I think, because playing basketball, and he ended up graduating from the UMass. When he came back to our home, and then he decided that he wanted to go on vacation, so he went out to the Cape, and he spent the summer out at the Cape after his school year, which it's okay, you know. He's supposed to be working in the store for us and helping. No, he's out at the
Michael.
Cape. And what does he do? He gets a job at a rental store in the Cape. And he works out at the Cape in a rental store to pay for his living out there. And he had a girlfriend, Mary Donatelli from Uxbridge, and she was a Smith College graduate, and so they were sort of getting together out at the Cape, and when they came back, they announced that they would be going to get married, and what they did was he wasn't ready to settle into anything as yet. And so Michael decided, and Mary took a job down in New York as a teacher. And Michael said, well, I'm going down too. So he's going down to New York, and he's worked at a good job here, making sandwiches in a shop. That was a good job for him, you know, after college, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he worked at that for a while, and then the man that owned the sandwich shop also was buying depressed properties in New York, in the Bronx area where the places were wrecks, and now this guy would buy them for depressed prices, and he would have then maintain them or try to paint them and make them livable, and Michael was then, because he was very handy, he was asked if he wouldn't go up there and do the maintenance. And it was a funny thing because there was a lot of Spanish people up there. And he said, what color do you want the room painted? And he said, red. And then he said, what color you want the next room painted? Red. What's the next room? Red. They wanted only one color. Red all the way through. Well, he worked at that for a while, and he got kind of bored with it, and so he took a job in the prison, Rikers Island, and that Rikers Island is under the bridge in New York, and he got the job there, and the routine at the prison, he was going to be a maintenance man at the prison. You got a cup of coffee and a newspaper, and you sat in the room where they had coffee and newspapers, and you sat in there until about 10 o'clock in the morning. And then they decided to walk around and just see if anything has to be done in the prison, you know. So they walk out and they look around, and well, it's almost time to get coffee again. So they go back and get coffee again.
Not much to do, or?
Well, they didn't want, they were lazy people.
Oh, okay.
And he couldn't do anything. He was not a person that would sit around. You know, he was very anxious to do something, and they just didn't do anything. And this kept up for about a month, and he decided that wasn't going to be his. He was getting so bored there that he decided to go. So he quit that job, went back to making sandwiches, and then the year that they had down there was up. She had a contract for teaching for 1 year, and she decided to come back. So they came back to Massachusetts, and Michael started to work in the store, and while working in the store, we were doing okay.
What store is this now?
Now, this was a Taylor rental store.
Okay, so that's the one you
When
started.
the Taylor rental, we started it, it was all tools.
Okay, yeah,
And that is a story I'll give you now.
yeah, okay.
Okay. The Taylor rental business was well established. There was maybe, I don't know, 10, 15 Taylor rental stores within the area of Massachusetts that I knew of. And I was working for the Royal Lace Paper Company when I was in New York, when I got out of the service.
Mm-hmm.
And I started in the shipping department at Royal Lace. And I was going to be loading trucks. I was making $28 a week. And I was had a choice at that time. They let me collect 52 weeks of $20 a week from the government, or you go to work and make a couple pennies more. Mm-hmm. So I decided to work. And so when I'm working in the shipping department, I worked in the shipping department for 2 or 3 weeks loading trucks. Then the plant superintendent said, we need somebody to check the orders going to the packers, because they were getting complaints about the packers not putting the right stuff on the orders and stuff. And so I was transferred to the stock room, and I had to check every order going to the packers to make sure that what was on the order was on the packer's truck. Mm-hmm. And I had to write out a slip indicating it was okay, and then pass it on and move the merchandise to the packer and have him pack it and so on. And I worked at that for a period of time, and the plant superintendent came over to me and said, I want you to go upstairs and do some assistant work for me. And I thought, listen, prior I was looking for a job in drafting. I went and I was taking a course at Brooklyn Tech, and they were having a drafting course there that I was interested in, and I was going there at night. Mm. And when he come and asked me, I told him I'm more interested in drafting, and I'm going upstairs with him. I didn't know what he had in mind. Mm. And so he left, and he didn't say anything. And then about a month later, he comes back to me, and he didn't say anything. He said, you're going upstairs. Put a suit jacket on tomorrow, and you're going upstairs. So I put my suit jacket on, put my tie on, got mm-hmm. the shirt on, and which I didn't have a lot of clothes because everything was Marine Corps. Yeah. You know, that's all the clothes we had. And so I'm up in the office and trying to find out what I'm going to do. And he sets me down at the desk there. He said, every order that comes through, you have to see that the proper numbers are on the order and that we have it in stock. In other words, a lot of orders were being billed, but when they get down to the shipping department, they don't have the stock to fill the order. Mm-hmm. So I had to review every order that came in, and the type of business they had syndicate stores. A syndicate store was Woolworth, Kresge, Grant, Green, Newberry, and all these stores, that multiple store owners. And those people were one part of the business. then they had what they call the jobbers. The jobbers were people that would have bulk doilies, and in other words, there'd be 500 in a box. When they went to the syndicate stores, they would be all packaged in small quantities, you know, and in packages. So one was for the restaurant trade and the hotels, and one was for the purchasing in the syndicate stores. Now that all had to be scrutinized, and if there was a mistake on the order, and if we didn't have the type of merchandise that was being ordered, I had to take it back to the different sales departments. We had 2 different sales departments, and they had to contact the customer and tell them, we don't have this pattern, or it's out of stock. Well, can you substitute something? And you know, so, and then they would give it back to me, and I would be able to bill it correctly. So this was a job that I was doing for about a month or 2, and then my superintendent comes again to me, and he says, I want you to schedule now the machines up. So schedule machines. There's 5-story building with products on all 5 stories, and I had to schedule the machines. So I started scheduling.
What does that mean, schedule the machines?
Well, we have, say, 20 doily machines. Somebody's got to tell them what to run. They had, say, 10 shelf paper machines. Shelf paper was what they put on the shelf in the kitchen, and it was paper on it.
Right.
And we made that. We made baking cups, and we made gift wrap. We made shelf lining paper with just rolls of white paper and different qualities. And it was a very involved job. And I'm scheduling. He started me with one department first, and I was scheduling. And you can't schedule stuff that they don't have. You got to have schedule stuff that they had. And if they don't have it, you had to schedule in the printing department to print the stuff that they needed, and so on. It was like a stepping stone, and it was involved. But I took to it very, very easily, and I went along with it. And finally, I had an assistant, and they put me in a separate office, and we were in the scheduling department. And then when I was in the separate office with an assistant, they asked me to work in each department individually and see what I could correct in a department. I wasn't experienced in that area, but I went in. And we took the light situation because the girls were counting these doilies out, and the lighting was very poor. So I called up the electric company and asked them what we could do to improve the electric, and they improved the electric all the way through, and that worked out very well. And then dealing with personnel, that was a very difficult job. I had one instance where one of the people told me that somebody had poor hygiene, and they don't want to work near that person. So how do I handle it? I said, well, the best way to handle it was I'll talk to her friend that is working with her and tell her, to clean up. And well, as you know, that didn't work. She ended up quitting, and it was a bad situation. Huh?
It solved the problem.
Well, it did, but I was embarrassed. She was embarrassed. Then the next incident came up where the same thing happened again. So I said, well, I'm not going to handle it that way. So I asked the girl, the nurse, to call the girl down to her office. So we had a nurse, and called down the office. That didn't work either. She came back, and she quit because, it was very embarrassing to her. So I said, there's no good way of handling it.
Did it happen again at all? Or
No, it didn't, but I said there's no good way to handle it.
No way to tell people that they smell.
And another incident came along where at a slow part of the year, they had to lay off people. I had 7 or 8 people to lay off, and all girls. And my boss, who was the plant superintendent, he said, you give them a check on Friday when they're going home, and that was it. Oh. And I said, no way. I said, I'm going to tell them ahead of time. I'm not going to do that and make a shock out of it. You know, I said, I don't do things that way. Well, I did it my way. I notified them early in the week that they were going to be laid off. And do you know what my week was like? Every time I passed them, they were crying. And I would walk up the aisle and there's them crying and another one crying. And I was miserable all week long. And then finally, we had to lay them off at the end of the week, but it was a miserable week for me. And I, of course, said he was right, I was wrong. I learned my lesson. And, but that was learning process. And then when I worked at this place for a few years, a new big company wanted to buy them out. So they were bought out by this big company, and now we were a different company. Now, instead of Royal Lace, we were Standard Packaging Company and so on, and things were kind of changing a bit. And what happened with the changing was the men walked out of the plant on strike. The women stayed in, but all the men walked out. And then what happened is the union people came in and offered us a deal to move our freight. And and the company, of course, did. The union was able to move our freight, and these people walking outside thinking that they're on strike, and the union is working against them and moving our freight anyway. And it was a terrible situation, but the company decided after that they should get out of Brooklyn. Brooklyn was not the place to be, and there was just too much labor problems and other things. So they decided to build out in Fort Wayne, Indiana. So they built a beautiful building out there with a railroad siding in the building so that we would not have to transport from there to the railroad siding. So we have a load right in the building. And all of our equipment and machinery was put together and crated out and sent out to the new plant. And I was going out there and stay there and set them up, set the plant up for them so that it would be set up.
So
like,
how old were you at this time?
How old was
Yeah,
I?
at this
About 24.
24. You don't, wow.
And I'm assistant to the plant superintendent at this time, and we were working real hard, and we had to keep the flow of the, the merchandise as well as the machines, so you had a timing element. The machines had to be taken down, but you couldn't take them all down. you had to keep some going while the other ones were going out there, and it was quite a job to hit everything right.
What time did you get home after work?
I was living in Long Island at this
Yeah.
time. We bought a house out there, and it was a house that cost, I think it was $12,000, and it was in Valley Stream, Long Island. That house probably is about $1 million today out there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it was a Long Island Railroad ride, you know, type of thing.
Yeah.
I took my car, but I would fall asleep before I got home, you know.
Yeah.
The Bell Parkway was terrible, you know.
And then back again the next day.
Yeah. So that car was not good, but the train was more reliable.
Yeah.
But you got to catch the last train before you get home, you know, and that was a little bit of a problem. And that was interesting. When we got out to Fort Wayne, I didn't intend to stay out there very long. I didn't sell my house. And I went out there for a year. That I told them I would stay at least a year. And that we did. I moved out there, and we stayed there for a year. And when the year was up, two of the men in the business wanted to go into business. So they wanted to join the three of us together, and we would set up our own division in competition to the company we were working for.
Right.
So we gave them notice, and I came back to Valley Stream where I live, and waiting for the other guys to come back. One was the salesman, and all of a sudden we find out that he backed out, the salesman, because he was the key. If you don't have sales, you don't have a business, you know. And so he backed out because he didn't want to take the chance. So he stayed with the company, and he stayed with it for a while. And then I'm left without a job, and I'm living in Valley Stream, and so I started to look for work. And I went around to some of the places I thought possibly could use my expertise, which was packaging and so on. And so I got a job with Sun Chemical Company in Stamford, Connecticut. And that was about an hour from Valley Stream. I went from Valley Stream up to Stamford, Connecticut every morning and back at night. And I was very pleased with the company. It was a very well-run company. And then, lo and behold, after a year, they wanted to move. So they moved their plant from Stamford, Connecticut, to Carlstadt, New Jersey. Now, Carlstadt, New Jersey, the mileage was about the same, but the traffic wasn't.
Traffic, yeah.
So it was a 2-hour ride there, 2-hour ride home at night. When they moved the plant into the new building, so I was getting kind of discouraged with that 2-hour ride over there. And then the fellows that I was going to go in business with, they said they can get a deal with another company which was up in Northbridge. And that was, at that time, it was called Kupfer Brothers. Do you know where that is?
No? Where is it?
Do you know where the wire company is? The wire company.
Yeah.
Well, that's Kupfer Brothers.
Oh.
And then it would change from Kupfer Brothers to Millen Industries. When I worked there, it was Millen Industries. And they had a section of the mill that was empty. And they and us got together and made a deal, and we were to bring the equipment and the machine into the building, and we will share in the profits of the business. And so that went along for a number of years, and we were very successful. We were making shelf lining paper there. We were making paper doilies. And we had a gift wrap paper, and that was the basic line. It wasn't complicated, but it was running 2 shifts, you know, and it was very profitable. And then the mill was cited for pollution. They were polluting the Blackstone River.
Oh.
They had watercolors in coating the paper, and the watercolors at the end of the run, they had to get rid of the materials, and it would go blue Blackstone River, red Blackstone River, yellow Blackstone River.
Wow.
And they shut us down, and they said, you got to do something about screening that color out before you put any stuff in there. Well, we tried several things, and none of it was acceptable to them, and they shut it down. So the company had another mill out in Ohio. So I had to go home and tell them that now we're going to move to Ohio. And here's Michael and Mary Ann were both at the college age. And when they were both going to college at that time, they said, no, we don't want to move.
Well, this is what we're gonna do because I think we gotta wrap it up. But I wanna ask you a question before we wrap it up, and that way we'll
Okay.
just focus on one question and you tell me. What would you like to tell the world? What would be the most important thing that you would like to pass on to
That
people out there?
our best friends are our children.
Mm.
We have had a very good relationship with our children. Our children have had good relationship with one another, and they are all hardworking people. Michael is retired now. He had sold his store, which I didn't tell you about.
Mm-hmm. No time.
Huh?
No time.
No,
We covered everything,
Yeah.
almost everything. We had a lot.
Right.
We gotta have you over another time so we talk more because we're not even. I don't think we're even a quarter done, are we?
well, I can keep going maybe.
I know. Well, thank you very much for joining me in the show, Mr.
Okay.
Tonry.
Yes,
And thank you for watching.
Thank you.
To all of you out there, and we'll see you next week when we can have someone else come and tell their story.
Okay.